The French Quarter of New Orleans is a place where shadows cling to wrought iron balconies, and every brick seems to remember centuries of sin and sorrow. At 826 North Rampart Street, above what was then the Voodoo Spiritual Temple, a nightmare unfolded in October of 2006 that shook the Crescent City to its core. The old Creole cottage built in 1829 had survived storms, wars, and generations of tenants, but nothing could prepare it for the horrors brought by bartender Zach Bowen and his girlfriend, poet Addie Hall. Police entered the apartment after Bowen's suicide and were met with a meat locker chill from the blasting air conditioning. The stench was absent, but the sight was unforgettable. In pots, on the stove, investigators discovered body parts. In the oven, seasoned limbs. In the fridge, a torso sealed in plastic. Spray-painted confessions on the walls pointed them to each horror, leaving officers to confront a scene out of a waking nightmare. Zach Bowen was a California native who once looked like the golden boy of the French Quarter, tall, blonde, and charming enough to make strangers trust him instantly. But behind his smile was a war hero broken by trauma. He served as a military policeman in Kosovo and Iraq, returning home with medals, but carrying ghosts from the war. One friend recalled him breaking down over a child he befriended overseas who was later killed for talking to American soldiers. Addie Hall, fiery and artistic, was known for dancing barefoot, writing poetry, and working the bar at the Spotted Cat. When Hurricane Katrina struck, they stayed behind together and became local legends. With no electricity, they built a bonfire in the street to cook food, handed out drinks to neighbors, and made the most of the disaster's silence. The press latched onto their survivalist charm, but the storm only masked the cracks already forming beneath their skin. The storm's aftermath brought them unwanted normalcy, jobs, routines, and expectations they weren't ready for. Addie battled bipolar disorder and trauma she carried from childhood. Zach drank harder each week, his PTSD tightening around him like a vice. Friends recalled violent arguments, shattered glass, and slammed doors. In early October 2006, Addie asked the landlord to take Zach off the lease after catching him cheating. Hours later, he strangled her in their apartment and left her body on the futon while he figured out what to do. Days later, he moved her to the bathtub and used a knife and hacksaw to cut her apart. For nearly 2 weeks, Zach kept up the lie. He showed up to his shifts withdrawn and quiet.
In Addie's diary, Zach charts his descent into madness.
He writes messages on the wall in spray paint. He chronicled his list of failures: friends, jobs, military, marriage, and love. And he believed he'd failed at all of those things.
Wearing sunglasses indoors and telling co-workers Addie had gone back to North Carolina, friends believed him. She had vanished before. In her journal, he left an 8-page confession calmly describing how he killed her, dismembered her, and felt nothing. He wrote that he spent his last days with drugs, alcohol, and strangers to burn through what money he had left. On October the 17th, he walked into the Omni Royal Orleans, ordered a final drink, and jumped from the rooftop. Police found a suicide note, apartment keys, and his military dog tags in his pockets.
A folded up piece of loose leaf paper had "for police only" written on it. I started reading the note. I had to take my life for the life I took. It said how he had taken the life of his girlfriend.
The note said, "This is not accidental. I had to take my own life to pay for the one I took." His journal, confession, and police interviews later formed the basis for the book, Shake the Devil Off, which detailed every step of his breakdown. What detectives found at the apartment matched every word. That apartment never lost what happened inside. It is now part of a haunted museum, where guests walk through the kitchen and hallway in uneasy silence. Some say the air grows heavy near the stove. Others feel watched near the bathroom. A few have reported hearing whispers or seeing movement in the mirrors when no one else is there. The fridge door has opened on its own during tours, and the old stove sometimes clicks late at night. Some believe Zach is still restless and Addie has never found peace. Locals say the apartment feels wrong no matter the hour. Always cold, always listening. What happened there left more than blood. It left something that lingers in the walls. Hidden in the mountains near Summerville, Georgia, the narrow road up Taylor Ridge winds through trees that seem to whisper even in daylight, leading to what remains of Corpsewood Manor. In 1976, Dr. Charles Scudder, a respected pharmacology professor from Loyola University in Chicago, bought 40 acres of secluded land and left behind his career, his family, and the modern world. With his lover Joseph Odom, he mixed mortar by hand and stacked 45,000 bricks to build a 2-story brick manor that took nearly 3 years to complete. They named it Corpsewood for the leafless trees that surrounded the ridge each winter. A pink gargoyle watched above the entrance, and stained glass windows, cut by Scudder himself, glowed with images of skulls and Baphomet. There was no electricity, no phone, and no running water, only lanterns, a 160-foot well, and the quiet isolation of the Georgia wilderness. Before retreating into the hills, Dr. Scudder had been associate director at the Institute for the Study of Mind, Drugs, and Behavior, where he conducted government-funded research on LSD and other psychoactive substances used to explore the limits of consciousness. He was brilliant and eccentric by every account, dyeing his hair bright colors, keeping a pet monkey, and playing the harp while lecturing on the mind. When he left Loyola, he took his harp, his books, 2 mastiffs named Beelzebub and Arsenat, and his devoted partner Odom, seeking a life of complete independence. He was a registered member of the Church of Satan, an atheistic order that glorified personal freedom over faith, and he filled his home with symbols that reflected that creed. The chimneys bore engraved pentacles. The interior displayed skulls from his lab. A black and gold statue of a demon from German folklore stood beside a hand-crafted window of Baphomet, casting red light across the walls. For a time the men lived quietly, drinking muscadine wine on the gazebo and playing harp music under the stars. But curiosity drew strangers to their door. Beside the manor they built a 3-story chicken house, with the first floor for poultry, the second for supplies, and the third painted entirely pink and filled with mattresses, whips, candles, and chains. The locals called it the Pink Room, and whispered about devil rituals and wild parties on the ridge. 17-year-old Kenneth Avery Brock, a hunter from nearby Walker County, met Scudder while tracking deer and was welcomed inside. He drank the wine, breathed the heavy air of incense, and later told police that Scudder performed oral sex on him in the Pink Room. Brock returned many times and spoke of the encounters to his roommate, Tony West, a 30-year-old ex-convict with a violent history, who mocked him for allowing it to happen and convinced him that the men were wealthy and hiding money inside the manor's brick walls. On December the 12th, 1982, Brock and West drove up the ridge with 2 teenagers, Joey Wells and Teresa Hudgens, carrying a .22 rifle and a jar of their homemade drug mix called Toodaloo. They climbed to the Pink Room, drank Scudder's wine, and huffed fumes until the air thickened. Brock left and returned with the rifle. Scudder laughed and said bang bang, not realizing it was no joke. Moments later, Odom was shot 4 times in the kitchen, and both mastiffs were gunned down beside the fire. West dragged Scudder inside and demanded his fortune, but there was none. Seeing Odom's body on the floor, Scudder said softly, "I asked for this." Before West fired 5 rounds into his head at point-blank range, the killers looted the home, taking a gold-plated dagger, silver goblets, and some jewelry, then fled in Scudder's Jeep, later killing Navy Lieutenant Kirby Phelps at a Mississippi rest stop to steal his car. It took 4 days for anyone to reach the ridge and find the bodies. Deputies entered the manor and found blood smeared on brick, shattered stained glass on the floor, and Scudder's books on Satanism and pharmacology strewn beside spent shells. The press labeled them homosexual devil worshippers and turned their home into a symbol of fear. Brock surrendered on December the 20th, 1982, and West on Christmas Eve. Both received life sentences after confessing to the murders. A year later, arsonists burned Corpsewood to its bones, leaving only the gazebo and its ivy-covered arches. Investigators later recovered Scudder's golden harp, his self-portrait, and the black and gold statue from a private collection in North Georgia. Today, locals call it Devil Worshipper Mountain, and those who visit after dark swear they hear the echo of gunfire and smell the faint odor of smoke. And some say the sound of a harp still drifts from the trees. In the Sierra Nevada mountains above Quincy sits the small town of Keddie, once a logging stop turned quiet resort community. The cabins lined narrow dirt roads beneath heavy pine trees, a place people chose for safety and simplicity. In late 1980, Glenna Sue Sharp, recently separated from her husband, moved into Cabin 28 with her 5 children after leaving Connecticut. She was only 36, trying to raise John 15, Sheila 14, Tina 12, Rick 10, and Greg 5, all on her own. The cabin had belonged to Plumas County Sheriff Doug Thomas before he vacated it. Neighbors lived only steps away, the Seabolts in Cabin 27 and the Smart family in Cabin 26. Children went in and out of each other's homes without thought. Yet in just 5 months, Cabin 28 would become infamous for one of the most brutal crimes in California history, turning an ordinary mountain village into the setting for a mystery that still lingers. On the morning of April the 12th, 1981, Sue's daughter Sheila returned home after a sleepover next door and opened the front door to find her family's world destroyed. The living room floor was a scene of violence. Her mother Sue lay partly covered with a blanket, gagged with tape and fabric. Her brother John and his friend Dana Wingate were bound with cords. They had been slashed, beaten, and strangled. 12-year-old Tina was nowhere in sight. In a back bedroom, Sheila's 2 younger brothers and their friend Justin Smart were discovered alive untouched and still in their beds. Neighbors recalled hearing muffled screams around 1:15 a.m., but no one realized where they came from. Sheila ran screaming to the Seabolts for help, while neighbor Janie Seabolt climbed through a back door, saw the carnage inside, and pulled the boys to safety through a bedroom window.
Whoever was there and whoever did this took their time.
There seems like there must be more than one killer to have 2 teenage boys tied up and tortured.
It's my belief that Johnny was probably trying to protect his mother. With that kind of chaos going on, there had to be more than one person to control the scene. It was evil.
Johnny, Dana, and Sue are brutally murdered. But Ricky, Greg, and Justin somehow lived through the attack. And suddenly it dawns on them. There could be another survivor.
Investigators arriving at Cabin 28 found weapons across the living room that included 2 bloodied kitchen knives, with one bent from force, a hammer, and a pellet gun. Sue had been stabbed in the chest, her throat cut and struck with what appeared to be the butt of a Daisy 880 pellet rifle. John's throat was slashed and his skull showed heavy fractures from hammer blows. Dana had suffered severe head trauma and was determined to have been strangled. The victims were bound with tape and cords stripped from appliances and an extension cord that the attackers had brought in. A bloody footprint was documented in the yard, and drops of blood were found on Tina's bed, suggesting she had been taken alive. Detectives concluded the killings all occurred in the living room, and that the violence showed signs of a personal targeted attack rather than random intrusion. The investigation soon focused on neighbors. Martin Smart, who lived in Cabin 26 with his wife Marilyn and stepson Justin, told deputies a hammer of his had gone missing. His house guest John Boobed, a former Chicago man with a criminal record, was also questioned. Witnesses recalled seeing a green van parked outside Cabin 28 that night. Justin, interviewed under hypnosis, described 2 unknown men and helped create composite sketches, though these were drawn by an amateur rather than a trained forensic artist. Marilyn later told investigators that Martin was abusive and that he openly disliked John Sharp. Years later, a counselor claimed Martin had confessed to killing Sue and Tina, saying Tina was silenced because she had witnessed the crimes. Despite these confessions and evidence, no charges were filed, and both Martin and John died without ever facing trial. leaving their names tied permanently to suspicion. In April of 1984, 3 years after the murders, a bottle collector found a human skull and bones at Camp 18 near Feather Falls, more than 60 miles from Keddie. Forensic testing confirmed the remains belonged to Tina Sharp. Not long after, an anonymous caller phoned the Butte County Sheriff's Office, identifying the bones as Tina's before her name was publicly released, and proof the caller knew. Details no one else did. In 2016, investigators pulled a hammer from a pond that matched the description of Martin Smart's missing tool, and in 2018, new DNA tests from evidence at the scene linked the crime to a living suspect. Still no arrests have been made. Cabin 28 was demolished in 2004, but its shadow remains, and many who visit the site describe an overwhelming sense of dread or claim to hear voices in the silence of the trees. For the Sharp and Wingate families, justice has never come, and the story endures as one of California's darkest and most haunted unsolved crimes.
The year right now is 2021. You have not been forgotten. We have better technology now. We are here to communicate with you. Get any information from you that you can give us through our objects that we have, so that we can turn it into the police who are still working on your case. This is so important. They had recently just found another object that was used to harm you. It was a hammer, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything that happened to you. You did not deserve any of it. We're here for you.
Bad. Bad.
Just said bad?
Bad.
I know it was bad. It wasn't okay. I just saw somebody move next to the tree. You can't see that far.
Mm-mm.
I'm feeling very uncomfortable right now.
Yo, I just saw something move.
I see movement. Holy guys, right here.
Literally right in between the trees.
Holy what did I just see? Right there.
River. Fix the angle of your river.
Guys, there's shit happening over there. Yeah, there is. There's movement.
The blackness of the trees to the right, and then there's
movement right there.
The light starts in the tree line. I saw a movement too.
Is somebody over there?
It says something's wrong, and the device didn't let me know.
Something's wrong. Somebody there? Is that you? Somebody's walking right there. Okay, guys, I just want to also say that I know you guys might want us to go in some of these buildings. That's not right. We would, but we didn't get any permission. And for the people that do know us, we are burden. I was just talking about going in the house and it said burden. Anyways, you guys know us very well. We're not disrespectful. We'll never be disrespectful. If you want to see somebody come in these buildings, then it's not going to be us. It happened here in the woods, in a home that used to be here.
Right where we're standing?
Right where we're standing. And so far, we've gotten the best evidence.
I trust you.
I trust you.
Wow.
Thank you.
I can't see that, but wow.
Up in the hills near Griffith Park, there is a stretch of winding roads, lined with old stone stairs and palms, where Hollywood money built its dream homes in the 1920s. At 2475 Glendower Place stood a Spanish Revival mansion that looked like a movie set, with arched windows, a tiled conservatory, and even a ballroom on the top floor for parties. Guests remembered the Stauffer family hosting Christmas gatherings with music and dancing under the high ceilings while cars filled the narrow street. But the shine did not last. The first owners, Florence and Harold Schumacher, died in the house in 1928, only weeks apart. leaving neighbors whispering that the property was unlucky. In 1931, film critic Welford Beaton moved in with his wife Sarah Louise and their son Donald, who developed a blister from tennis that became infected and killed him at 21. Welford soon declared bankruptcy and walked away. By the early 1950s, the house had passed a Whittier College and sat waiting for another family. Dr. Harold Perelson bought that house in 1956 for $60,000, believing it was proof he had arrived. The mansion measured just over 5,000 square feet and towered over the hillside. Harold was a heart surgeon and USC professor who put his hopes on a spring-loaded syringe patent that he spent years developing. His partner tried to cut him out, and though Harold fought in court, he only walked away with $24,000. It left him drowning in debt and humiliated in his field. His 18-year-old daughter, Judy, wrote to her aunt that her parents were on the merry-go-round again with the same problems, only worse. Harold was hospitalized and given Thorazine after a suicide attempt, but the family called it heart trouble. His practice in Inglewood was losing money, and the dream home had become a burden. Friends later, said Harold, had grown distant and moody as 1959 came to an end. On December the 6th, 1959, Harold rose before dawn and attacked. He struck Lillian in the head with a ball-peen hammer as she slept, and she died at 42, choking on her blood. He then turned on Judy, who fought back and escaped to neighbor Marshall Ross, bleeding from skull fractures. Joel was 13 and Debbie was 11, and when they woke in fear, Harold told them, "Go back to bed. This is a nightmare." They ran instead and survived. Ross confronted Harold, who soon collapsed on a bed after swallowing a large number of pills. Police found the hammer, empty bottles, and a copy of Dante's Divine Comedy open beside him. The passage spoke of being lost in a dark forest, and investigators noted it as a chilling reflection of his final act. The coroner later confirmed his death was caused by the overdose, not by acid, as some stories claim. A year later, it sold in probate for $60,000 to Julian and Emily Enriquez, who never moved in. They used it for storage and left the Perelson belongings untouched. Through grimy windows, people saw a dusty television, scattered furniture, and holiday decorations. Judy, Joel, and Debbie each had decorative light switch plates still on their bedroom walls. Judy's was engraved with her name, while the others were believed to show a rooster and a windmill. Judy's plate stayed in place for 57 years until realtor's wife, Melissa Pinkerton, stole it and gave it to reality star Stassi Schroeder. When Emily died in 1994, her son Rudy inherited the house. He never lived there and told reporters it was too big and carried a past he wanted no part of. Cats roamed inside while neighbors painted the garage and trimmed the weeds. Rudy kept the home locked, but allowed friends to use it for storage. Rudy died in 2015, and the house sold for over $2.2 million to attorney Lisa Bloom and her husband. They gutted it to the studs but never finished, and in 2020 a developer bought it for $2.35 million. By 2022, it was listed again for $3.5 million with no takers. Nearly 100 years after it was built, the mansion had seen the deaths of its first owners, the destruction of the Perelson household, and decades of decay. The ballroom that once held Christmas parties was empty. The gardens once filled with guests were overrun with weeds. Neighbors claimed to hear footsteps echoing inside at night, even though it was locked. Passers-by swore they saw a woman's figure in the upstairs windows, and investigators reported cold spots and strange equipment failures. Many said Judy's old room felt heavy as if the past had never left. The mansion on Glendower Place still sits in silence, haunted by both history and what lingers after. Up in the hills of Los Feliz, just north of Hollywood Boulevard, there's a stretch of quiet roads where stone mansions and palm trees hide behind wrought iron gates. At 5121 Franklin Avenue sits the Sowden House, better known as the Jaws House because its facade looks like a mouthful of broken teeth. Built in 1926 by Lloyd Wright, son of Frank Lloyd Wright, the house was designed using carved concrete textile blocks in a Mayan revival style. The rooms all open into a 22 by 68-foot courtyard, which once featured a 32-foot pool and 2 water organs later destroyed in the 1933 Long Beach earthquake. The original owner, John Sowden, was a photographer who used it for parties but sold it within 5 years. In 1945, the house was purchased by Dr. George Hodel, a Los Angeles physician known for treating wealthy patients, collecting art, and keeping secrets. By 1947, his name would surface in one of the most horrific murder cases in California history. On January the 15th, 1947, the body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short was found cut in half in a vacant lot in Leimert Park. Her blood had been drained, her face was slashed into a grim smile, and her body was washed and posed with chilling precision. The cuts were clean and medical, suggesting someone with surgical training. George Hodel came under suspicion. He had an IQ of 186, entered Caltech at 15, and later studied medicine and venereal disease. In 1949, he was accused by his 14-year-old daughter, Tamar, of incest during a party at the Sowden house. He was acquitted after defense witnesses portrayed Tamar as unstable, though she was never diagnosed or discredited by police. In 2003, his estranged son, Steve Hodel, a retired homicide detective, released a book claiming George was not only the killer of Elizabeth, but a brilliant yet sadistic psychopath who may have committed dozens of other murders. In 1950, the Los Angeles Police Department planted microphones inside the walls of the Sowden house and recorded George Hodel for nearly 6 weeks. The tapes captured his voice discussing illegal abortions, underage girls, and fear that the police were closing in. One chilling line caught attention. "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia? They can't prove it now." Some believe he said it sarcastically after realizing the house was bugged. He also mentioned the death of his secretary, Ruth Spaulding, who had overdosed in 1945, while Steve Hodel would later claim this was murder. Police at the time ruled it a suicide and found no evidence of foul play. George was never arrested. Soon after surveillance ended, he fled the country and lived in the Philippines and Asia for decades, working in public health. He returned to California later in life and died in 1999 in San Francisco. The Sowden house fell into disrepair after Hodel left. The textured concrete blocks crumbled and the courtyard pool was filled in. In 2001, designer Zoran Balbs purchased it for $1.2 million and spent $1.6 million on restoration. Steve Hodel continued writing books, accusing his father of dozens of murders across 3 continents, including claims that he was the Zodiac Killer. He presented photographs, voice transcripts, and handwriting samples as proof, arguing that George used his medical knowledge and social influence to escape justice. Critics say his evidence is speculative and based on coincidence and misidentification. Still, the story stuck. The LAPD has never reopened the case, but the public fascination with the Black Dahlia and the Sowden house only deepened. Once viewed as an architectural masterpiece, the house is now remembered as a place of silence and suspicion. With its jagged stone facade and shadowed basement, the house feels like a mausoleum of secrets soaked into the walls long after the screams stopped. Whatever happened here didn't stay buried. Like this video, subscribe for more, and send it to friends who aren't afraid of what still waits in the dark.